So we all pretty much know the story, right? The pandemic hits, and boom, our collective mental health just takes a nosedive. And look, it makes sense. In a lot of ways, it's totally true. But what if that's not the whole story? What if the real story is actually a lot more complicated and, a lot more useful for what comes next? Yeah, let's really get into that question. See, there's this fascinating study that looked at a group of frontline workers, and they decided to dig way deeper than just a simple before and after snapshot. And honestly, what they found could pretty much rewrite our whole understanding of what it means to be resilient. All right, so to start, let's look at the evidence that, well, it backs up the story we all heard. Because at first glance, the data absolutely confirms it. For all those helping professionals, doctors, teachers, and in this particular study, clergy, the pandemic was just an insane period of undeniable strain. I mean, just think about it. Clergy were right there on the front lines. They were trying to navigate all this fear and loss in their congregations. They had to suddenly pivot to doing everything online. And all the while, they're dealing with their own personal risk. The stress from their job was, it was completely off the charts. And the numbers, they really tell the story here. You can see between 2019 and 2021, there was a clear, significant jump right across the board. More depression, a big spike in anxiety, and a huge increase in just pure emotional exhaustion. So, case closed, right? The pandemic was just bad for everyone's mental health. End of story. Well, not exactly. The real story, the one we're here for, starts when you look past these big, broad averages. See, the researchers behind this study had this one crucial advantage, this kind of secret weapon. They had already been tracking this exact same group of people for years before the pandemic ever hit. And that allowed them to ask a much, much more powerful question. What if the pandemic wasn't this great equalizer that hit everyone the same way? What if it was more like a great revealer? What if the real key to understanding who struggled and who, made it through wasn't just about the crisis itself, but about the foundation they were already standing on when it all began? As the researchers themselves put it, you just can't understand the destination if you don't know the starting point. It's that simple. And having all this pre-pandemic data, it was like a key. It let them unlock the story beyond just the simple averages and see all these hidden patterns playing out underneath. And wow, those patterns were striking. By digging through all that data from before, they discovered that clergy didn't just fall into these simple good mental health or bad mental health buckets. Nope. Instead, they consistently fell into 4 totally distinct profiles. So let's look at the breakdown from 2019, okay? This is right before everything changed. The biggest group, almost half, at 44%, was what they called flourishing. But then you have these really important middle groups, languishing and burdened but fulfilled, plus a smaller distressed group. Think of these as the 4 different starting blocks in a race nobody knew they were about to run. Okay, so what do these profiles actually mean? Well, flourishing is pretty much exactly what it sounds like, right? Minimal distress, low burnout, just a high sense of well-being. Distressed is the complete opposite. But it's these middle groups where it gets really nuanced. Languishing is that feeling of being kind of stuck or aimless, mild depression, moderate burnout. And then there's this other group that is just fascinating. Burdened but fulfilled. I mean, think about that. These are people who definitely felt the strain. They had mild symptoms of depression and anxiety and moderate burnout, but at the very same time, they were reporting these high levels of purpose and accomplishment. So they were feeling the weight of the work, for sure, but they were also feeling its meaning. It just goes to show how complex our mental state can really be, right? Okay, so you've got these 4 distinct starting points all lined up. The stage is set, and then the pandemic arrives. It's basically a massive real-world stress test for everyone. So the question is, what happened to each of these different groups? Right, this is the big question. Did everyone just slide down the same amount? Or did some of these groups turn out to be way more resilient than others? Let me tell you, the data here tells a seriously powerful story. Okay, this diagram right here, it's really the heart of the entire study. On the left, you've got the 4 groups back in 2019, and on the right, you see where they all landed in 2021. Those colored bands show you how people moved between groups. Now, what's immediately striking is how stable the top flourishing group and the bottom distressed group are. I mean, for the most part, if you started there, you stayed there. The real drama, the real story, is all that chaos happening right in the middle. Let's just zoom in for a second on the most dramatic change. The distressed group. It grew from 14% of all the clergy to 22%. I mean, that is a huge shift. So the big question is, where did all those new people in the distressed category actually come from? And the answer is, they came almost entirely from the middle. The people who were most at risk of falling into severe distress, it wasn't the folks who were already there. It was the people who started out languishing, or even burdened but fulfilled. It's like they were standing on the edge, and the pandemic was just the final push that sent them over. So, to sum it all up, if you went into the pandemic flourishing, you basically had this powerful protective shield. More than 3/4 of those folks stayed right where they were. If you started out distressed, you were probably going to get stuck there. But if you were in one of those middle groups, you were the most vulnerable to things getting worse. Your starting point wasn't just some minor detail. In many ways, it was destiny. Look, this isn't just a story about clergy during the pandemic. Not at all. It's a huge lesson for every single one of us about how resilience actually works. And it offers something like a blueprint, a game plan, for how we can prepare for the next crisis. Because we all know there's going to be a next one. So, what are the key takeaways from all this? First and foremost, where you start matters. A lot. Resilience isn't some magic power you suddenly find in a crisis. It's built on a foundation of well-being that you have to build beforehand. And that means we can be way smarter about prevention, right? If we can spot those languishing or burdened groups, we can offer support before the storm hits. And finally, it proves that mental health isn't just about not being sick, it's about the presence of genuine well-being, just like that burdened but fulfilled group shows us so clearly. And that really leaves all of us with a pretty critical question to think about. We can't predict when the next crisis is going to show up, but what we can do is work on the foundation we'll be standing on when it arrives. This study shows, crystal clear, that the work we put into our well-being when things are calm, that's our absolute best defense for when things get chaotic.